This is my 1992 Renault Trafic, and this is its engine, the ubiquitous 1.7 litre, used not just in the Trafic but in various Renaults of the era, and a few Volvo models as well. With regular servicing, maintenance and care, these engines will perform admirably and give years of trouble-free motoring. Unfortunately, in recent years this van hasn't had any of that. It started out life as a minibus and had it fairly easy, only covering 60,000 miles in 25 years. More recently, though, it fell into the hands of a local builder who, let's just say, wasn't too fussed about looking after it. I bought it several years ago as a non-runner, and the original engine had a huge crack down the side of the block, probably due to the last owner not using any antifreeze in the winter. So I took a chance on this engine, which has been stood for a few years but was running perfectly well when it was last used. Unfortunately, this didn't work out. Although I did get it running, it's burning quite a lot of oil and pumping black smoke out from the exhaust. Now I could throw a load more time and effort into sorting this out, or I could take this as an opportunity to upgrade. You see, although the 1.7 was the most common engine used in the Trafic, there were a couple of larger units that were offered. The next size up was the 2 litre, and this was a very good engine and equally as reliable as the 1.7. To me though, the best engine that Renault fitted was the later 2.2 litre fuel injected engine, which was essentially a larger version of the 2 litre. I actually have this engine in my other van which I use as a daily driver, and had always planned one day to fit one to this van. Well, that time has come, so if you want to see the whole process from start to finish, including all the detail and the technical content, hopefully you'll enjoy this. The original plan was to fit this engine into the van. I got it from the local scrapyard several years ago, and it had been left open to the elements for quite a while, so I always knew it would need a complete strip down to fully assess the condition before it could be used again. This is one of the reasons why I didn't just put this in to begin with. However, I've recently been able to acquire a second one. The guy who I got it from had bought it in order to swap out his 2.5 litre diesel engine, but he actually managed to find a new old stock engine instead. I know, unbelievable, but it's true. The only problem was that that engine didn't come with any ancillaries, so he's had to strip off everything from this engine in order to use them on the new one. So what I've bought from him is essentially just the block and the head. So the new plan then is to use all the ancillaries from that engine to build this engine back up, and then try and integrate that into the van, which at the moment of course is set up for a 1.7 engine. So I think we'll start by stripping this one down and seeing what we've got to work with. The first thing to go is the wiring loom, which on this engine is much more complicated than the 1.7, mainly because of the multi-point fuel injection, but also because Renault decided to integrate a separate power distribution arrangement into the engine loom with its own separate fuse box. The main engine earth is secured with this large Torx-headed bolt, and above that is a clamp which secures the loom to the block. This little pronged piece holds the front part of the loom secure inside a channel which passes across the front of the engine, keeping everything out of the way of the cam belt and the pulleys. It's all missing from the other engine though, so it's got to be removed. And yes, I did go back for that spacer afterwards, just in case you were wondering. Ugh. With that off, the rest of the loom can now be removed, taking care not to damage anything, obviously. And a final clamp at the back of the head is the last piece holding it on. I'll put this carefully to one side for later. There will be a couple of repairs needed before it can be used, but we'll get to that a bit later on. As well as the main manifold fixings, it also gains strength through this bracing piece, which ties it down to the block. And if you're wondering what that blanking plate is for, well, this engine shares quite a lot in common with the 2.1 diesel engine of the same era, and that had a separate vacuum pump to run the brake servo, which was mounted in this location. I guess Renault decided it was cheaper to cast all the blocks with this and just blank the whole off when not needed. This hefty looking bracket is the main upper support for the alternator. And with that off, I think it's time for a bit of a tidy up. On to the other side of the engine now, and the first piece to come off is the thermostat housing. I'm being especially careful with all of the rubber hoses as none of them are available anymore, so I'm hoping to reuse as many as I can. A lot of the hose clamps that Renault used were those one-use crimp types, but here they've gone with a more traditional Jubilee clip. These ones, for those that don't know, have a quick release feature. You basically just undo the tension and then flip the top piece over. It's quite a neat piece of design there, actually. Because of the corrosion on the aluminium pieces, these hoses can seize on quite strongly. So if they won't twist off, then breaking the seal with a screwdriver is often the only way. You know you've done enough when you hear that click as it releases. This little return pipe which goes back up to the expansion bottle is run partially in steel, which can often rust through, so I'll need to check this one later to make sure it's good enough to use again. This piece bolts directly to the back of the water pump and connects with another steel pipe which runs to the back of the engine. Again, these are often made of quite thin walled steel, so it's quite common for these to rust through, especially at a weld point or if there's any sign of chafing. Both these pipes don't look too bad, so fingers crossed they can be reused. This just shows why it's so important to change the cooling fluid often, especially on an all aluminium engine like this. The rear support for this pipe picks up on one of the exhaust manifold fixings. And with that undone, I can extract it through before moving on to the manifold itself. First stud that stayed in. Even the dipstick's missing from the other engine, so that's got to come off as well. These basically just push into the block with an interference fit. This bracket is used to hold the cooling pipes which run down to the gearbox, this being a feature of the later gearboxes, as the early ones had a problem with the diffs overheating, so the solution was to add water cooling. That was tight. And why have they used such large bolts to hold the bracket on, I hear you ask? Well, those fixing points were already there, as this engine was used on several other Renault cars as well, and this was the location chosen for the air conditioning pump, hence the large M10 bolts. Obviously it doesn't make sense to reuse an old clutch like this, so I will be fitting a new one. All I'm doing here is getting to the flywheel, as that's also missing from the other engine. The bolts used for the flywheel would have been fitted with thread lock, so they're usually quite stiff to undo, and they'll normally pinch quite tightly all the way out. Luckily most of these aren't too bad, and the impact driver does help a lot here. As well as these bolts, the flywheel also has an interference fit with the drive flange, so some gentle levering is needed to free it off. Although the lifting eye plate is present on the other engine, it's a bit bent up and mangled, so I might as well swap it out for this one. This bracket is used to hold the wiring loom as well as the two breather pipes from the cam cover. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that one of those nuts didn't actually need undoing. I didn't spot that until afterwards. One of the quirks of that new old stock engine was that it came with an aluminium cast sump, which is unfortunately no good in the Trafic. You see, that engine was built for the Renault Safran, and because of the low bonnet on those, they had to cant the engine over quite a bit, and to make this work they had to use a different sump with a shorter oil pickup. This is of course no good if you're fitting it into a Trafic, so I'll need to refit those parts on this engine to make it work again. And I've placed it over a drip tray just to catch any dregs of oil which may be left. You may have noticed that there were various bits already missing from this engine. Well, I have to confess, in recent years I've raided it for several parts, mainly to help with fault finding on my other van. So I also have a box of bits to use as well, including the injection rail, distributor and the all-important ECU module, although I'll probably replace all those sensors for new ones just for peace of mind. Right, that should be everything that I need off of this engine. So join me in part 2 when I'll be going through it all, cleaning it up and getting it ready to bolt to the new engine. It's cracked pretty much entirely in half.